I was thinking about this recently for several reasons. Number one, the idea of free turns is becoming less and less acceptable. We see it not just in how we still have sleep and freeze clause, because those give free turns way too easily. And not to get into a whole debate about freeze, because you can't summon freeze on command. You don't think so, but then it happens over and over. So yeah, that's why we have it. But even the idea of giving one free turn to the opponent is too much in terms of letting certain setup sweepers sweep. Now, that's more on the setup sweepers, of course. Like if you give one free turn to a Volcarona or a Cloister, is it okay for them to set up and win the entire game on the spot against a healthy team? Generally no, right? So I illustrate that not to mention, freeze or Volcarona, Cloister, anything like that, but more to illustrate the idea of we know that one free turn is really, really busted sometimes. So Paralysis tends to give a lot of free turns. And that is why the idea of paralysis being broken or a paralysis clause a la sleep and freeze clause has been thrown around. Specifically for DPP. Don't see anyone saying, "Oh, we need to implement Paracross in every generation." But I don't think that too many people would mind. So the other reason I was thinking about this was because some people will watch a game with full paralysis in RBY or DPP, and something will full paralyze on a key turn, and they'll go, "Oh, DPP moment, RBY moment," and it's like, I don't know. I think that mechanic is kind of universal, I think obviously while paralysis becomes more palatable in Gen 7 with Thunderwave becoming 90%, that sounds like a kid who just got fully paralyzed on a crucial turn. I was like, is my neighbor listening in? Because, they better have ad block off. Anyway, so yes, it's more palatable with Thunderwave being 90% in Gen 7 and later, and speed only being halved as opposed to quartered. But those are not really fixing the fundamental issues of full para being 25%, which is way, way, way too much. Ever since people really realized just how powerful yellow magic was, then you would see people, because I remember when I started out, fishing for full paralysis was very, very rare. It was pretty much pair it with Jirachi or Machamp, or otherwise, what are you doing? Why are you relying on something so unreliable? And then we realized, 25% is actually crazy high. And you would regularly see people going for, good players too. Let me just sub spam with this Pokemon, because if you're looking for 125% chance, all you need is one and you have a couple chances to go for it. Absolutely. I remember an SPL game where a very highly regarded player subbed up with a Jirachi against a full health Heatran that was paralyzed. Just, because in most 75% of the time, that is a stupid move. All you're doing is losing health on your own Jirachi. So why? But you get the full para. I don't know if this player was planning on subbing down multiple times and losing more health in the event that the. Okay, well, my upstairs neighbor might be listening in again. But yeah, most of the time you are just losing health in your own Jirachi. What's the point? And the point is, hey, 25% is actually pretty good. And this is the kind of gameplay I really dislike. That Pokemon unfortunately tends to reward a lot. When the odds are not that high, like a waterfall flinch or something, but they're just high enough to where people go, let me go for it. You don't see people throwing away Pokemon as like for crits, for example. Like early in the game, you don't say, "Oh, well, I might crit this thing, so let me stay in when I should switch out." No, but you do see people saying, "Oh, they might full para, I might get this flinch, whatever." So that gives them a confidence to go for it that they wouldn't have if the odds were lower. And because the odds are higher, then this kind of wrong play most of the time winds up being rewarded. And para is very much a culprit of this, especially because it falls into another category of not just being RNG, not just having the RNG be too high, but that is the problem, that the RNG is too high, that it is too consistent at enabling this kind of stuff. Like if you have a fully paralyzed Pokemon and you get to sub against it multiple times, and all you need is that one full para, those are pretty good odds. If you just need that one, So I mean, people rely on less all the time. If all you need is one ice beam freeze, increase the odds a little. If all you need is one crunch drop from T-Tar, or psychic sped F drop from Jirachi, things like that are relied on all the time. Thunder paralysis in GSC from Zapdos. So yeah, then the full para itself. Not obviously, not every player is using full paralysis as a crutch. You don't always go in saying, you know what, I'm going to make every move assuming that my opponent will full para and I'm going to throw away Pokemon. No, most of the time it's not. But the byproduct of those free turns, when you are playing someone good and every turn matters, then they are game breaking, especially because it is not difficult to get that full para. I mean, as broken as Freeze is, at least you have to spam Ice Beam, you know? And it's not that easy to land that over and over and over again. So, I mean, as broken as it is, it's much less. It's much worse than if you gave me a chance or a choice. Would you rather have no freeze clause, or would you rather have paralysis taken out of the game entirely? I really think I would go with paralysis because it's so simple to just spam T Wave or in earlier generations Thunder, or in Gen 2 and 3, mostly 2. But or discharge in later generations. No, I think it's way too easy to spread, especially because ground type. It's not just as simple as switching to ground type. And actually in later generations, it's also more manageable because electric types are immune to paralysis, so that helps. But yeah, I mean, then you have like other stupid cases like Glare Superior, and before it was banned Zygarde, and obviously Zygarde was crazy broken in general, but the thing Superior pulls off in Gen 6 and 7 off the strength of Glare, that's not an electric type, and you don't counter Superior with electric types. You think, oh, Zapdos, oh, boosted HP Rock, goodbye. To say nothing of the Stealth Rock weakness, switching into boosted Leaf Storms is already nasty. Taunt on Roost, oh, it knocks off, oh, it's horrible. So, yeah, it pulls off all kinds of goofy stuff with paralysis. And it gets to the point where the whole problem isn't that, one full para. It's that eventually you will full para, and it just needs that one turn, something that's boosting this much. You can say, oh, it's a superior thing, but it's not just a superior thing. It's everything that spams sub or, just gets free turns in general off of this. Because it can be game breaking, and it's not just like a late game thing where every turn matters, although that is stupid too. But it can be as simple as early game. Oh, that full para, there goes your turn to set up Stealth Rock, for example. There goes your knockoff. There goes your whatever else. And you realize at this point that 1/4 is very, very high. So that brings us to the question of: do we break? Do we get rid of paralysis altogether? Probably not. I mean, we banned sleep, but with T-Bolt being the move that it is, I really doubt that you would ever just be able to do that. So I think Paraclaws is more in line with what we do now. So the question is, do we break the simulator mechanics? And people say, oh, no, we shouldn't. It's like, well, I think as long as we're playing the game we're playing on the simulators, where we don't follow every in-game thing to a T. I mean, I made that video recently about the Pokeball problem, where you don't see if something's in a Cherish Ball or not. And if you don't have that, then I mean, I'm not saying everything is equal in impact, but I think we can take these liberties, especially because Freeze Claws still exists, and Freeze Claws should exist, I think, anyway. So if you're just going to argue complete cart mechanics, I mean, I guess, but get ready for Freeze to ruin your life. And yeah. So I would be a big fan of Paraclaws, at least in something like DPP. Now, how do you implement it? It's actually, well, it's easier to implement in most cases because, no, I guess not. I mean, if you, no, I totally misthought that because of things like body slam. Sleep is easier to implement. Like if you would play on Wi-Fi, like often was the case in Generation 4, then you would say, oh, well, you just don't use Spore after you slept something with Breloom. Easy, right? It's not like there's a move like Relic Song that also causes sleep in addition to doing damage. But with para, then you got your T bolts, you got your body slams, whatever. So you would have to alter the game so that once you paralyze the opponent's, I don't know, clefable, then you can't paralyze their T-tar. Unless clefable feints, obviously. So I don't know. I guess this is enough of a departure. But I mean, that is how. Actually, no, it's not. I take it back because that is how freeze clause works. Once you freeze something with ice beam, you cannot freeze anything else. It just fails. So yeah, I know there's no precedent. Like technically, people will say, "Oh, well, there's precedent in Pokemon Stadium having freeze claws and whatnot." But I mean, that is picking and choosing. If we're going to pick and choose, oh well, we don't want to implement the Pokeball thing or the thing where HP goes down at a certain pace, so Pokemon with higher HP stats will lose health more slowly, and that way you can figure out if something has HP EVs or not, which is actually very true and very big. If we don't have that, then we don't want to have that, but we want to have something else. The consistency thing, I mean, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of arguing with people about superhero movies where certain narrative things or like superpowers or whatever that are obviously ridiculous. No, those are fine. But then there's a certain level of ridiculous, which seems like the exact same thing as the non-ridiculous, but the hardcore fans will be like, oh, no, no, that's absurd. They can't have that power. They can't do that, even though it's functionally the same thing. And I don't pretend to understand that. So I don't, and I know this is not, one monolithic entity of people who are for and against, and there's nuance in this kind of thing. But I think it would be really good because there's a reason why Earthworm, may be the greatest player ever, certainly for a time, one of my favorites still. He used to say paralysis is Pokemon's strongest status, after sleep and freeze have been neutered, obviously. I even made a video about it called Paralysis, Pokemon's strongest status. And I think it just really, at this stage, especially in the older generations, I won't pretend to know anything about whether paralysis needs to be dealt with in Scarlet and Violet, but I think at this stage in the older generations, we do understand them well enough. We do know that they are what they are specifically, and we are not overhauling the game entirely. Like we're not dropping Deoxys defense into uh, Sun and Moon because it would maybe be palatable. That was a stupid example. I just completely BS'd it. But it's more making them the best versions of themselves. That's why a lot of tiering suggestions that I make or that are suggested by the player base at large are not about completely overhauling the tier, but about making it a better version of itself. Even look at a Black and White right now. It's not banning Drizzle or banning Spikes or something more drastic. It's banning Reuniclus, which has a very, I mean, it's a big change, of course. Not saying that big changes are off the table, but it's not fundamentally altering the fabric of what the tier is. Right now, there's discussion about No Guard and Machamp and DPP, which is a similar can of worms. And I think Paraclaws would be similar in that you're not taking paralysis out entirely, and you still would have, just getting one Pokemon paralyzed would be big. You will still have that thing where you will have a Pokemon that just loses a turn and the effect is game changing. It's going to do so consistently, and RNG that is too consistent is generally something we try to avoid. It's why we get rid of Double Team, for example, or evasion moves in general. Or Oko moves. It's like, oh, it's only 30%. Well, Scald and all that. But, full para, it's so easy to spread. So you would still have the negative elements of paralysis, but you would have it much more manageable overall because you could not spam paralysis on everything and then just completely run something over or run a team over because, oh, I got a sub up and as easily anyway. I don't know. Maybe it's screaming into the void, and we just have to accept that paralysis is what it is. I don't like the argument though when people say, "Oh, Pokemon's not a competitive game, so why stop trying to make it one?" It's like, well, then if we're going to play the game, we may as well try to play it right. I don't buy that whole, oh, it's whatever. Who cares? I mean, if you're not that invested, fine, but to not be invested and then stand in the way of trying to make it competitive, that I'm not a fan of at all. So if you are going to care about the game, and at this point, I should hope that most of us who are playing can admit to ourselves, yes, we enjoy playing the game, and there's nothing wrong with it. Because when I was younger, then everyone was like very ashamed. Because I think the average age was younger, and everyone was kind of ashamed of it. It's like, oh, I can't wait to win this tournament and then quit forever. It's like, dude, why are you playing the game then if you want to quit so badly? And people say, oh, children's game. And I mean, in game, sure, give this game to a kid. I mean, I'm sure they would figure it out to an extent, but I don't know. Those are very kind of archaic arguments, and it really serves to to bring it to a larger point, as these videos so often do. It really reminds me of people who don't really have a stake in a certain argument, but they just hate change for whatever reason, even if that change would be good for them, which is what's particularly baffling. But they will just plant their feet and say, no, 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 it works. Why change it? And all those other elemental enemies of progress that just, yeah. So Paraclaws, I don't know if Paraclaws is even the right idea. That's just an idea. Like, how do you deal with paralysis in general? Do you just nuke the status like sleep has been nuked? Do you just, I don't know what else. I don't know. Do you change the mechanics so that electric types can't get paralyzed? Personally, I like that electric types can get paralyzed. I think it's good to be able to mess with things like Zapdos, because Zapdos is pretty crazy. And in those earlier generations anyway. I don't know. I think that's basically most of what I had on my mind vis-a-vis the existence of Paraclaws. But I do think, look, I don't know if paralysis is broken, but I do know what is not good for Pokemon in general, and that is elements of the game that enable nonsense too often. This is why Jirachi Ironhead, in my view, should be banned. Not because statistically, look, the odds of Jirachi flinching out your entire team, if it's a good team and you play well, are not very high. The problem is when some guy decides, you know what, forget everything. I'm just going to flinch and hope it works. And because of the high odds of Jirachi Ironhead flinching, then it is going to work, even if it's a bad move. You know how many times I've seen someone stay in with Jirachi on Heatran with a fully healthy team? And, it is objectively a bad move to stay in with Jirachi and go for that Ironhead, go for that Body Slam. In a similar vein, that play I mentioned from SPL, from a high-level player, go for that sub. That was a bad move. They had a fully healthy team with like a million Heatran counters. Jirachi was valuable. Why lose any of its health? Even if it was just for the safe option to sub. Now it can't switch into 2 Gengar Shadow Balls, just as one example. Or a Draco Meteor, or an Outrage as well. Whatever. It can't take an Earthquake from full health. I could keep going. Can't switch into a close combat or superpower, whatever, right? You get my point. Can't take on Gyarados. I'll stop there. But, those moves are worse objectively, and yet because the odds are pretty decent, they wind up bailing you out. So then you get that sub on the Heatran and you start doing stupid para-flinch stuff to it, and then you get that flinch on it as it tries to do whatever, or you get that Body Slam para on it, and the more you can limit stuff like that, the more you can limit things like players going for Hail Mary double Ice Beam freezes, or Oko moves to draw a rather extreme parallel, because you don't really have to think much. You just, let me get in position to roll those 30%. Yes, you can use it skillfully. You can use anything in the game skillfully. People always make an argument, I don't think X cheese is really that cheese because you have to use it kind of skillfully. It's like, dude, you have to use Primal Groudon kind of skillfully to get the most out of it. That doesn't mean it wouldn't be insane in OU. It's like, you have to avoid switching Primal Groudon into Landorus TEQ to get the most out of it. It's like, okay, so that's skill. So yeah, just because you can use paralysis effectively, just because, yes, okay, it is a good skill to understand the odds, when you're staring in the face of full para, or when you are positioning yourself. In GSC, for example, this is very common. You get that Zapdos in position over and over. You barrage the opponent with Thunders to land that Thunder para on the Raikou. Then it's either parried and you will outspeed it with your Vaporeon or your Machamp, or it's forced to rest, and it's also worse off against those Pokemon. So with those things in mind, then yes, it is skillful to go for that, and then eventually, position it in that case. But then, sometimes you'll get that case where, the Raikou full parried as it tried to rest. Now, funnily enough, in GSC, this is actually much less of a problem, because you will have to mount a repeated systematic assault on the opponent, and one full para will not just completely ruin the game. But there are always going to be turns, and yes, there are always going to be turns of bad luck. Someone's going to get 3 crits in 3 turns, stuff like that. The problem is that's very low percentage. Full paralysis is very high percentage. And just one free turn is just, if you can get free turns this consistently, that's kind of where the issue lies. So yeah, you can position yourself to where, I just need that thing to full para once and it's fine. But then it's too easy to get that sometimes. It's too easy to spam sub and when all you need is 125% over the course of a couple turns, and then you're off to the races. And then it's yeah, like even if you're going to say, "Oh, I don't want that Pokemon to stay in and get a free sub. I'm going to stay in and attack it," and you're paralyzed, then it's like, well, you either switch and give it the free sub, or you stay in, and you're probably going to give it the free sub anyway. So yeah, this kind of limiting decision making, that's what Pokemon tends to really be about, expressing skill like this, and not just saying, roll the RNG. Yes, you want to manage your RNG well. That's what being good is about. But it's also about positioning and player interaction, and not just, well, roll the dice. That's why we don't allow sheer cold Kyogre even in Ubers, because then it's like, oh, Kyogre hit the field. Congratulations, that was the easiest thing ever. Now click sheer cold and you might OHKO that Kyogre answer they have. So that's basically everything I wanted to say, I think. So yeah, let me know what you think. I'm very anti-paralysis, so I don't know if I believe in Paraclaws or if there's anything to be done in general, but I have observed over the past several years, or at this point it's closer to a decade, Jesus Christ. But as players have really appreciated the brokenness of Para, then they use it more, which is good, for the record. I'm not saying, oh, these kids, they have no respect for the honor of the game and they use Para too much. No, nothing like that. It's a great tool. You should use it. What I'm talking about is that players will often make fishing for Para the basis of their entire strategy, which is, both in the team builder and then in the battle. And that kind of stuff is very negative, in my opinion, because again, it's less, because it's like running baton pass almost. It's less, I'm going to interact with my opponent and outskill them, whatever. It's more, I'm just going to roll the dice, and the odds of the dice rolling are so high, and the effects of me getting the dice roll are so drastic that all I have to do is roll that dice. And when that's what you have, it works too often for it to be desirable, in my opinion. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.